Hey guys, welcome back. I'm going to be working on the Chevy Dooley pickup truck today. A couple months ago I had fixed spots that needed welded, and I sprayed some epoxy primer on the bare metal areas just to keep it from rusting or getting anything on it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some 180 grit sandpaper just by hand. So all I want to do is scuff up really good that epoxy primer, so that we could put some body filler on this. So I'm going to go around and scuff all these areas up just like that, so that we can get some body filler applied to it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back and we'll put some filler on it. Okay, I've got some body filler here on my board, getting ready to mix it up. This is an Evercoat body filler that can be applied directly over bare metal. But in our case, I put epoxy primer down before the filler, and I just scuffed it with 180 grit just to give the body filler something to stick to. But you can go directly over bare metal with this product, and I have other products that you can go over bare metal as well. It used to be where you couldn't go over bare metal with body filler. They didn't recommend it, but over the years they've since changed that. So they've obviously changed their formula to be able to go over bare metal. But in a lot of cases I do go over epoxy primer just to be on the safe side, especially after welding. So I'm just basically going to go around now and put the first coat of filler on. We'll probably knock this down with a DA sander, maybe a little bit of a block sander, but then when I put my glazing, dolphin glaze by U-Pull over top, we'll probably hit it with a block. But I'm just going past the repair, just trying to fill it all in and get it somewhat flat. Basically, I'm just going to go around the whole bed and get all the spots that need filled. The whole bed has been sanded down. I sanded it down a couple months ago, so that's all done. The welding where there were some cracks have all been fixed. So now we are just filling in the areas that I had to fix. And I'm putting it on thick. Normally I wouldn't put it on that thick, but I want to get it pretty much built up in one coat. So I'm going to go ahead, finish going around this, then we'll come back and sand it down. Okay, this has been sitting for a little while. I'm just going to knock these down as flat as possible with a 6-inch GA sander with 80 grit. And then we're going to go mix up some dolphin glaze by U-Pull. We're going to put a nice even coat over top, and then I'm going to block sand that down, and that's what's going to finish straightening out the panel. These are small divots. They're not really big. They're not much to worry about as far as getting ripples. feels pretty good. Maybe a real slight ripple, not bad. When I put the icing over top, it's going to straighten it out the rest of the way. As you can see, I keep my sander flat on the panel and I crisscross, just like you would do if you were block sanding. So now I'm going to go around and we're going to hit the rest of these spots. I'm just going to do it off camera because it's going to get kind of boring to watch me doing the same thing to every spot. So I'm going to go around and hit all those, blow it off, and then we're going to mix up some icing, glazing, putty, whatever you want to call it. Okay, now back in this corner, I had to cut and re-weld in here. It had a crack in the original sheet metal from when these Cadillac taillights were put in. So I literally had to cut this, tap it in, weld it. It's on a video in the past. And I had to put filler over it to kind of get this shape back to it. I'm gonna knock it down with the DA first. Go grab a block real quick. This also has some 80 grit on it, and we're just going to kind of finish shaping this up. And I'm using this block because when I roll a piece of paper over it, it kind of gives it a nice eased edge, and it helps me shape this corner back. Now we're not going for perfect. There's a little divot here, here, and here. We're going to leave that because I know that if I sand that divot out, I'm going to go too low. It's not going to look right. So I'm going to leave those in there for now. Okay, that's looking pretty good. All right, so now I'm going to blow this whole thing off, and we're going to mix up some of that icing, and I'll show you what I use. And I'm going to hit all these spots again. Now when I spread this, I'm going to spread it wider than where I sanded, and then I'm going to come back and we are going to sand this down with 80 grit on a we're probably just going to use a 6-inch block sander. We don't really need anything longer than that because, once again, these are small spots. These were spots that I ground down that had like maybe a little rust bubble or something stupid. Up here where the stake pockets used to be, this was actually, must have been a hole drilled here at one point, but it was rusting a little bit. This was a stake pocket that got welded in. There was some rust. I cut it all out and I re-welded that in. Same thing with this stake pocket. The stake pocket in the back here was fine. That didn't have any problems with it. And then there was a little bit of cracking from these tail lights being installed, and this job was done. I did this truck probably 20 years ago, and what I think happened around here with a little bit of cracking was it just simply got ground down too far. When I welded in the pocket, I simply just ground through the weld too far, and there wasn't enough weld left to hold it. Plus this is a dually and it flexes a lot, so over the years of towing, I think this paint job has like 90,000 miles on it, so really not that bad for that long and that many miles. So let me get this blown off and we'll mix up a little icing. I'm not going to show me applying that. I'm going to do it the exact same way that I applied this body filler, but we're going to go out a little bit farther than we did with this one. This is what I'm using. U-Pull Dolphin Glaze. Gets mixed with the blue hardener. I also use this product by U-Pull. Fantastic glaze. Works just as good. I like them both. Reason why I have both is this went on sale, so I bought a case of this stuff. I think this is normally 20 some dollars a tube. I think I paid like 15 or 18 dollars a tube for this, so I bought a case of that. I like them both equally. I can't say one is bad versus the other. I think they're both good. So just mixes up just like the regular Bondo would. And I kind of like these pouches better than these because I can't seem to get it all out of this. This pouch, I can get just about all of it out. It's almost like having a tube of toothpaste. You can really roll it up and squeeze it all out. Let me get this hardener off of here. I'm not using the hardener that came with it right now because I have blue hardener. Same stuff. Just using up the tubes that are open right now and leaving these ones closed for now. Another thing, when you have hardener, knead it like this. If it's been sitting around for more than a day, go like this and mix it up. Because you'll notice if you use this stuff, and let's say it's been sitting around for a couple weeks, and you go to just squirt some onto your panel, you're gonna get liquid out of here first, like a clear liquid. And that, you don't want to do that. You wanna mix it all back together. So if you loosen the cap a little bit, you can kind of knead it all back together and make sure that it's mixed up thoroughly. And we're just gonna put a pretty good amount on here. And like I said, I'm not gonna show me spreading this out. It's the same as what I just did earlier. And you can see how nice and consistent that is. There's no liquid or anything in there. And then when you mix your filler, you want to fold it over. Don't stir it. Stirring it creates air bubbles. So it's not worth stirring it, because then you got to chase air bubbles around in your filler pinholes and then have to deal with that. So, all right, I'm gonna mix this up, get it on the truck. Might have to mix up a second batch. And then once this dries, we'll come back and start blocking it down. Okay, as you can see, I spread this real smooth. Much different than I did the first Bodywork. So I'm gonna take my new piece of 80 grit on this block and we're gonna block it down. And that feels really, really good. So as you can tell, I crisscross. I go all different directions. So now I'm going to sand the rest of those areas down on the bed with this 80 grit. And then we'll come back with 180 grit and do it again with the block. And then at that point, the bed will be ready for primer, unless I see anything else as I'm sanding. So I'm gonna go sand down the rest of these spots and then I'll be back. All right, so now I have just about everything 80 gritted down. I got a couple spots I'm going back over a second time. I have some 180 on my block sander, and I'm gonna go over the whole entire side of the vehicle with it, both sides. And then after that, we'll be ready to blow it off and get it ready for primer. So basically, I'm just gonna go with a X pattern. and that feels pretty good. So I'm going to do that to the whole entire side, not just the bodywork areas. I'm not going to worry about the back wall right now because I'm just going to cover that with plastic. That'll get sanded later on. I just want to get the two sides bodywork, sanded down, and primer on them today so that it can sit and dry for a little bit. I don't primer over 80 grit sanding marks. I always go over 180. 80 grit to me is a little bit too rough, and what could happen is the primer will sink into the 80 grit marks and it'll show up in the future. So you don't want to go over 80 grit, you want to go over at least 180 grit. So I'm going to go ahead and get this sanded down the rest of the way, get it blown off, get it in a spray booth, and we're going to put some 2K primer on it. Okay, I got the bed in the spray booth. It's all blown off really good. I still need to use wax and grease remover on it and wipe it down, and I need to tape off the bed. So I'm going to tape off the bed just down each side here for now, and the whole top edge, just so that this carpet doesn't get any dirtier than it already is. It looks pretty good. I think I got just about everything. Around here might be a little goofy looking, but that all gets covered by the wheel flare. And I'm gonna bring the plastic just over this edge right here. I'm not gonna primer this right now. No reason to primer this, no point in wasting the material. This will get sanded down with 320 before I paint the truck, and it'll get painted. It's already pearl white, truck's going pearl white again. Now when I go to paint this bed, this truck, I'm gonna be painting the bed, the two wheel flares, the tailgate, and hopefully the tonneau cover. I really want to get all those pieces in the spray booth all in one shot, and it looks like I should have just about enough room. I might be able to take that bed and rotate it the other way, sideways, so that'll free up some more space. The reason why I want to paint all this at the same time is it's pearl white. So you want to try to paint and make sure your air pressure is the same, your temperatures are the same, your layers of coats are the same. So if you put 3 white base coats down and you put 3 pearls down, and you're using the same gun, you want to make sure you do that through the whole process so everything matches. And then when it comes to the front of the truck, the doors and fenders and hood, everything needs to be on the truck. So I need to paint the front of the truck all in one shot as well. So basically I'm gonna have to paint the door jambs, shut the doors, you know, a couple days later, and then tape it off and paint the outside. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to get this bed taped off. I'm not gonna show that. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some tape right here and I'm gonna overlap it. So it's gonna come up halfway and the sticky side is gonna be right there, and I'm just gonna put plastic right over top of it. One other thing I did, I sanded the crap out of in here. This was all peeling. So I sanded it all out really good. I'm gonna put a coat of primer in there and then shut the door, and it'll stay like that so it doesn't touch. And then I'll put 3 coats of primer on the outside. And then this bed will get sanded down with 180 grit block sander. And then I will put 2 additional coats of 2K primer over top of it after I block it down. And then we'll block it down a second time with 180 grit, and then 320 grit, and then 400 grit, and then it'll be ready for paint. But I like to do it twice because you always miss something. No matter how hard you try, you always have a pinhole, you have a scratch, you have a little bit of a wave that you just don't like, and that second primering fixes that. So I'm not primering in the door jambs or anything like that because I don't want any more build in those areas. Those will just simply get sanded down and repainted when I paint the truck. So I'm gonna quit talking now. I'm gonna get the wiring covered up down here. I'll probably just make the plastic long and then cover up this bed, and then I'll come back. We're gonna wipe this down and we are gonna get 3 coats of primer on it. Okay, I have the primer. It's been stirring for about 10 minutes. I love this Summit 2K urethane primer. I've had great success with it. Have not had any issues with it whatsoever. I've been using it for about 8 years now. So what we need to do first is wax and grease remover. We're gonna wipe the whole bed down. I also have, which is not for this project, but for a future project, I did buy a couple gallons of this Feather Fill by Evercoat. It's a polyester primer, and it takes 1 tube of hardener per quart. We will be using that on a future project. But and honestly, I've never used that before. I've always been leery of it because I've heard a lot of bad things about polyester primers, but I did a ton of research. You're not supposed to spray it in door jambs. You're not supposed to spray it on the insides of fenders. You're only supposed to spray it on flat surfaces, not in really tight corners and stuff like that. It's basically a spray-on body filler. It's not meant to do an overall primering job on. Like, you're not supposed to take that gas door off and build it with 3 heavy coats in there. That's not what it's meant for. It could literally lift around those edges. It's meant for flat areas. Like, if I were to use it on this vehicle, I'm not using it on this vehicle because it's a white paint job. It doesn't need it. But if I were going to use it on this bed, I would do exactly what I have there. I would probably tape off that jamb inside there, and then I would just shoot the sides. I wouldn't shoot the edges or anything like that. So that's just something to keep in mind there. I noticed that was a lot of the failure points where people were applying it incorrectly, and also they were applying it over bare metal. I don't have any bare metal showing. If I had bare metal showing, I would be putting an epoxy primer down before I put my 2K primer. But I had already epoxied all those spots that were bare metal prior to this. So I am going to put the 2K primer right over what we have here. If you have a little spot like this of metal, that's not going to hurt anything. But if you have spots, you know, like this of bare metal, you got to put epoxy primer down first. The epoxy primer is going to seal that metal. It's going to bite to the metal, and then your 2K primer can go to it. Now, Summit 2K primer is not recommended to go over bare metal. So this is not recommended to go over bare metal. The fillers I use are recommended to go over bare metal. I didn't go over bare metal today because we already had the epoxy on. Now, you can get a 2K primer that is direct to metal. So they do make them. I personally don't use them. I like what I use. Been using it for a long time. I know how it works. I know how it reacts. I know what to expect. So I keep using what I use because I'm familiar with it. So if I had a bunch of bare metal on this bed, I would be putting spot primer, epoxy primer. I would spot in the areas that were bare metal. So let's go out there and use some wax and grease remover. I use these blue towels. These are a 4-ply towel, and what these are, 3-ply? I thought it was 4. Yeah, there's 4-ply towel. These are a lint-free towel. Torx makes them. So basically what I like to do is really spray this thing down. Get it really saturated with wax and grease remover. This bed's been sitting for years. This bed has more than likely been waxed in the past. So we want to make sure that we get it all off. Now, before I had started sanding the bed down, I used wax and grease remover on it to get the waxes and stuff out so that hopefully, fingers crossed, none of the wax is still embedded into the old paint job. So like I said, I really hosed this down pretty good. I'm gonna have to fill this up and keep it low. But it's okay if it runs down the pan. It's totally fine. We're only primering the 2 sides. We're not doing door jambs. Now we're just going to take our towel here and we're going to go like this. Nice even passes across it. This bed's going to want to roll around on me because it's on wheels. I do have the heat running in here because I want it to dry a little quicker. It's 60 degrees outside, so we're going to probably run the heat at about 80 degrees in here. Now the first coat of primer I put on are just going to be over my bodywork areas, over my body filler areas. The second, third, and fourth coat will be an overall coating that goes over the whole entire bedside. The reason why I like to put the first coat just on the body filler areas is to let it shrink into the body filler areas. Another thing is important. Always know what your body temperature, your panels are at while you're painting, because it could say 80 degrees in here right now and this metal could still be at 50 degrees. So I use a little sensor here, and it's going to be hot right now. It's at 104 degrees, the metal, okay? But once I turn on those fans to exhaust the booth, that temperature is going to start coming down. I wanted to get this metal up to temperature because it was outside. I did the body work outside, and it's only 60 degrees out, and it was outside all morning, so that means that that metal was at 60 degrees this morning. So I wanted to get that metal temperature up. So now I'm going to turn the fans on and let it start coming down a little bit. You don't want to really paint if your metal's like way above 100 degrees. That will and can cause a problem with your materials drying too fast. And what will happen, primer's not as big of an issue as like clear coat. If you're trying to clear coat a 150 degree panel, it's going to probably get it's going to dry too quick on you. You're going to have a hard time getting a glass smooth finish, and you run the risk of like solvent pops coming out. So that's another thing. When you get the sheets on these products, you want to always make sure that you follow the temperatures the best that you can. You know, like I said, if it's 80 degrees in your shop, that doesn't mean your metal's at 80 degrees. It could be at 50 degrees. You don't know until you start getting into it. And all those sheets are designed for the temperatures that they tell you and the cure time that they tell you. If they tell you 8 hours cure time at 70 degrees, you need to be at 70 degrees for 8 hours. And that doesn't mean that your shop needs to be at 70 degrees. That means that your material that it's on needs to be at 70 degrees. You know what I mean? So if your shop drops down to 50 degrees at night, your metal's going to drop down to at least 50 degrees, which is going to prolong your drying period. So all those things all play a role in all this. It seems complicated, but it's really not. Once you get into it and you've done it for a little bit, you start to figure it all out. So I'm going to go ahead, get that fan turned on, and we're going to mix up some 2K primer. And we're going to use this cheap gun. I think I got this from Harbor Freight a couple years ago. It's literally like maybe $50–$60 gun, but it has a 2.0 tip in it. So it has a real nice tip. My spray pattern is turned in pretty far. I'm only getting a pattern about that wide. I might open it up a little bit more for the bed. I try not to open it up too far because I want to put on a high build primer. I want it to go on thick. The more you open your fan, the more it widens up, and it disperses it farther apart, and you won't get as much of a build. But you got to be careful when you have it turned in real far like I do right now, because if you overlap too far, then the primer's going to start running on you, which isn't a huge deal because it's filler primer. You're going to sand it down anyways. It's best to not get runs in it if you can. And also, metal temperature plays a huge role in that as well. Same thing with clear coat. If you're getting ready to clear coat and your side of your bed's at 50 degrees and you go blowing on a heavy coat, guess what? It's going to run right down the panel because it's too cold for it. So keep that in mind. So let me go turn on those fans. We're going to mix up some 2K primer. Okay, this is a 4-to-1 mix. 4 parts primer, 1 part hardener, and then I put about 10% reducer. And the only reason why I put a little reducer in there is to thin it out, just to make it a little bit easier to spray. If you run it without any reducer, it's going to be harder to spray out of your gun, and it's going to leave a little bit more of a texture. So I use these disposable cups. I will get around the vehicle probably both bedsides probably on a cupful, or maybe a little bit under a cupful. This has already been stirred. We don't need to stir it. But our first coat's going to be only over the bodywork areas, and I mean the other areas that are showing through and you can see primer and other paint underneath it, that's not going, I'm not worried about primering those areas. Just worried about getting the first coat of primer on the bare filler areas. So we're going to go to 4-to-1 here, and we're going to pour it to the top of the 4. And you can see how thick this stuff is. And the only reason why I kept using this is because I had really good luck with it on a car I painted for myself, my Dodge Dart, 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. I used this product, painted it, wet sanded and buffed it once. Nothing has ever shrank back on that car. I have no sanding marks that came back, nothing. So I got to give it credit to this primer, and I've used this since then and I've had really good luck with it. I used to use a lot of Omni products and PPG products, and it seemed like a lot of those products, if you didn't, and that's another thing, is you have to go over, you don't want to 2K primer over 80 grit sanding marks. I don't care what anybody says. People do it on YouTube all the time, and it's not correct. You cannot go over 80 grit sanding marks. What happens is, this primer is so thick, it's going to span over those 80 grit sanding marks, okay? So you're going to have a nice smooth surface like this. It's going to be beautiful. Like, yeah, I can't see any 80 grit sanding marks. It looks awesome. And then you're going to roll that thing out in the sun. It's going to sit there for days. And then all of a sudden, you're going to walk up to that bedside and you're going to see every 80 grit sanding mark in there. And I just don't want to deal with that, because if it shrank back once, how do I know that it's not going to do it again? You know, did it shrink all the way into those 80 grit sanding marks? Who knows? I've had really good success with 180 grit, and I've had really good success painting after 320 grit. I don't always go to 400 grit. On this truck, I might go to 400, but more than likely, I'm probably just going to stop at 320. I haven't had any issues with that. I always use an epoxy primer for my first coat, and I use it as a sealer. So I'll put down one coat of epoxy primer. I don't use sealer. I don't use epoxy primer / sealer. I just use straight epoxy primer, and it's mixed 2 to 1, and then I put 1 part reducer, which thins it out, and I use that as my first coat. Now, this being a white truck, I actually might try the Summit white epoxy primer and use a coat of that on the bed first before I put my white base coat down. So, you know, if you're doing a black paint job, you can use a gray sealer or a black sealer. If you're doing a white paint job, put a white sealer down. What that does is saves you material, okay? So you buy a gallon of white paint and you buy a gallon of pearl, okay, for this truck, and you use almost the whole entire gallon of white because you're going over a gray sealer. Why not put a white sealer down and maybe have a quart of white paint left over in case something happens and you need to fix something? Well, now all of a sudden you have extra paint because you went over a white sealer rather than a gray sealer. You're going to go over a gray sealer with white paint, you're going to have to put an additional coat on. So why not save that additional coat of expensive paint and put a coat of epoxy primer on there for a sealer? So, all right, well, anyways, so we're at the top of the 4 here. We're going to go to the top of the 4 there. Now we're going to add 10%. And this does have markings for 10%, 20%. We might go a hair more than 10%. This is a brand new gallon. I mixed it yesterday because I used it on an arcade cabinet, and it seems a little thicker than normal. So we're going to go maybe 20% with the reducer. It's not going to hurt anything, but you don't really want to go much past that. You want to kind of stay in that area. 10, 15, 20 at the most. Okay, I'm going to stir this up. It takes a few minutes to stir up because all my heavy materials at the bottom, all my liquids at the top. We want to make sure we fully stir this until we have the same consistency from the bottom all the way to the top. And I've had pretty good luck by stirring it like this rather than in circles. Seems like this agitates it a little bit better. So, all right, I'm going to get this mixed up, and we're going to go out there and get a coat of primer on the body filler areas. I'm not worried about tack clothing it off. It's okay if there's a little dust. I wiped it down. I mean, a couple specks of dust and dirt. It's not going to hurt anything. Primer, we're going to sand it. One other thing real quick. On these 2K primers, if you're using this disposable cup system, there is a built-in filter in the lid. You got to get that out of there. If you don't take this filter out, halfway spraying your first panel, it's going to clog up on you. So if you're worried about getting junk through your gun with your 2K primer, you can strain it with a traditional strainer right into here. I've had pretty good success with that, and having a 2.0 tip, it usually doesn't clog up on me, so I don't worry about that too much. Okay, before I get ready to paint, since this fans have been on, let's recheck the temperature of this metal. 95. It's gone down 10 degrees since when we got done wiping it off to now. I should have started at the back and worked my way forward. That's something you always want to get into a habit of doing if you have a spray booth or if you have an exhaust fan. You always want to start the farthest away from the fan and work your way towards the fan, because this overspray from back here is going to land on the panel up there. But by starting back here, you're keeping it wet the whole way through. If you start up there and work your way to the back, what you're blowing on here is going to be hitting on that up there, which is already starting to dry. Here, straight ahead, there's a couple pinholes, and that's why we do what we do with multiple coats, sanding in between, and re-primering. I was just setting my gun fan a little bit wider and turning the pressure up a hair more. This is only going to sit for 5 minutes. This is going to soak into that body filler really fast. Now we're going to put our first coat on in a couple minutes here. When we put our first coat on, we're going to let it dry for 10 minutes. If we put our second coat on, we're going to let it dry for 12 to 15 minutes. We're going to put our third coat on, we're going to let it, our third coat's our last coat. So between our first coat and second coat, we'll do 10 minutes on the first coat and 15 on the second coat. I was thinking we were doing 4, but we're only doing 3. The reason why you want to wait a little bit longer between coats is because every coat after the first coat is going to take longer to dry. So same thing with clear coat. If it says 5 to 10 minutes between flash time between coats, you know, your first coat you can put on, you know, right away once your base coat's flashed, however long it tells you to do that. And then if it says 5 to 10 minutes, wait 10 minutes to put your second coat on. But if you're going to put a third coat of clear on, now you want to start thinking, I should probably wait 15 minutes. Let's give it an extra 5 minutes. And you can always test it on an area that's not visible. Like on this bed, I could always test the clear right where the wheel flare is going to go, because the wheel flare is going to go over top of it and you're never going to see it. So you can touch it, and as long as like it's not real stringy, a bunch of strings are coming off, it's still a little wet. You want to let it tack up a little longer than that. Just, you know, with your clear coat, with your base coat, with your primer, everything, your first coat is pretty critical. You want to let that set up. If your first coat sets up really good and you don't get any runs in it, you have a better chance to not get runs after that, because your first coat, think of it as like an adhesive. You're putting that first coat on there and it's adhering to the panel and it's starting to dry. As it's starting to dry, well, now that first coat you put on there has a texture to it, because no matter what you do, you're always going to spray and you're always going to get some sort of a texture. As you can see, when I was spraying this, you can see some spots coming out because this stuff is real thick. But that's fine. It's filler primer. We're going to sand it. But you know, when you go to clear, your first coat of clear is sticking to that base coat. That base coat has a texture. So you want to get that first coat of clear on there, and you want to let it set, because after that first coat of clear goes on there, if you try to put that first one on smooth as glass, you're going to run it. But if you put that first coat of clear on there, maybe a hair dry, not perfectly flat, you let it set to the appropriate time that it tells you to let it set. That second coat's going to go on there. It's going to bite to that first coat, and it's going to be less likely to run on you. And after that first coat, that second, third, fourth coat of clear, however many you're doing, it's just going to smooth the process out. It's going to get you can lay it out smooth, and you can get a real nice finish with it. Okay, let's go out there, and we're going to put a coat on both sides. Okay, I didn't go super heavy on that first coat. I went a little on the light side. Now this next coat, I'm mixing up more. This next coat, I still had a little bit left in here, so I used another cup so that I got my mixture right. So now the next coat I'm going to put on a lot heavier. Another thing I like to do too is, this is the perfect opportunity if you're painting your car to practice how you want to spray the car. So basically, pretend that this is paint and you are spraying the sides of the bed like you're going to paint it. Do that same technique all the way through the job, and you'll get used to it and you'll know. I always start painting from the bottom up. So basically, I go from the bottom to the top, and then I go over the top halfway, then I run around to the other side, and I finish the top down, and I work my way down to the floor. So on the one side of the car, I start at the bottom, and then I end at the bottom on the other side of the car. Now, when we paint this dually, I'm pretty confident that there is a body line in the roof that we could tape off, so that we could paint the roof first on the dually, and then we could tape it off, which is going to make my life a million times easier to only have to paint the sides of the truck and not try to get on top of the truck to get the roof done. So I got to double check, but I'm about 99% positive there is a molding there that will be able to have a breaking point on that roof line. So all right, I'm going to get this stirred up, wait another 5 minutes or so, and we're going to go ahead and get the second coat of primer on. Let that set for about 15 minutes, and we're going to put the last coat on. I'm going to use up what's left in the gun on the driver's side of the bed, and then we'll mix up a little bit more for the passenger side. Okay, I'm done with it. I let the fans run for about 15 minutes and then I heated it up to about 120 degrees in here, just under 120. Figured I'd give it a little bit of time, a little bit of a head start on the drying process since I have the ability to do that. It looks pretty darn good. You could obviously clearly see the edges of where the body filler was versus the paint, which is fine. That'll completely go away. This is a little bit of something that blew out of the gun at first. But I'm really, really happy with this first primering. So now I'm not going to do any body work or any block sanding and primering again on this until I get the inner wheel wells. I'm sorry, the fender flares and the tailgate and the tonneau cover, which the tonneau cover is only going to need one primering. So what I'll probably do is get the wheel flares and the tailgate sanded and primered, and then we'll go back, we'll guide coat all those parts and we'll re-primer them all. And then we'll do the tonneau cover by itself as one primering. It's flat and it's fiberglass, so it does have a little ripple to it. There's nothing you're gonna be able to do with it. So we're just gonna sand it down, primer it once, and then paint it. So I really don't think we're gonna be too far off on getting the back half of this truck painted. And I already have the front of this truck just about all the body work done and primered on that too. And I believe I've done that twice already. So I'm gonna get out of here. It is hot. And that's gonna end this video, guys. So if you like what you're seeing, please like, subscribe, share. Any questions or comments, feel free to ask. Other than that, I will see you guys later.